I wasn't dead, but I couldn't feel my body. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at a receipt that wasn't mine. The date, the name, the address of the maternity clinic, and my husband's signature at the bottom. He hadn't cheated with some young secretary or ex-girlfriend. No, he'd fallen for a widow, a pregnant widow, one who had once sobbed at our table over her late husband while I poured tea. She had thanked me for being so kind. All this time, while I was mourning the life I'd built, they were quietly building a new one behind my back. And now he stood there, solemn, voice dripping with duty, telling me, "She has no one else. I have to do the right thing." What he didn't expect was for me to pick up my suitcase already packed and say, "So, do I?" I left before he could finish his performance. And that's the day I came back to life. They all thought I'd fall apart. I suppose I looked like the type, the quiet wife, the behind-the-scenes supporter, the one who made his meetings happen and dinner stay warm. But they forgot the most important thing. I was also the woman who built his world. I managed his contracts. I handled his connections. I forgave his failures. I made his reputation possible. And the moment I stepped out of that house with nothing but a suitcase and a bank folder he'd forgotten I had access to, I stopped being his wife. I became something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything left to build. The apartment I moved into was small and smelled of old paint, but it was mine. Every floorboard creak, every dent in the kitchen counter. I memorized them all like scars. They weren't flaws. They were proof that I was rebuilding from scratch. I bought my own dishes, hung my own curtains, cooked dinner just for me, and played music too loud while I cleaned. And for the first time in years, I sat at a table without setting out 2 plates. It was lonely, sure, but it was honest. And I realized being alone was never what I feared. It was being unseen that had nearly killed me. I didn't block his number. I didn't scream. I didn't post anything online. My silence was louder than any confrontation could have been. He messaged me once, a week after I left. "I hope you understand. It's complicated." I stared at the message for 2 seconds before deleting it. I understood perfectly. He didn't choose love. He chose control. He didn't want a partner. He wanted someone who'd never make demands. The widow didn't threaten his ego. She elevated it. She needed him. I didn't anymore. And men like him don't know what to do with women who stop needing them. The first time I cried wasn't over him. It was in the grocery store, in front of the frozen peas, because I realized I didn't know what I liked anymore. I had spent so long cooking for his tastes, shopping for his snacks, that I forgot what I enjoyed. I stood there for 10 full minutes, frozen, overwhelmed. Then I took a deep breath and filled the cart with things that felt like me: salmon, strawberries, dark chocolate, and too much cheese. That night, I made dinner with no recipe, no rules, and it didn't matter how it tasted. It was mine. I started painting again, not because I thought I was good, but because it was something I had given up to be his wife. Back then, he'd said, "It's just a hobby, right?" As if that stripped it of value. Now, in my quiet little apartment, I let the brushes speak. I painted women with wind in their hair, women standing alone at oceanside cliffs, women walking away from burning houses without turning back. I hung them all over my walls, messy and proud. For once, my space reflected me, not the version of me someone else needed. A few weeks later, I received a formal notice from his lawyer, a request to settle the divorce quickly and quietly. No demands, just paperwork. I stared at it, amazed. He really thought I'd vanish like an inconvenient footnote. But he forgot I knew the numbers. I had filed the taxes. I had helped bury his debt once and watched him take the credit. I sent back my own letter, precise, legal, and unshakable. And when he saw the terms, the message came instantly. Can we talk? I didn't reply. He wasn't used to me having boundaries. That's why it shook him. Lucas came back into my life unexpectedly. He was a client I'd helped years ago, one of the only men who ever thanked me directly for saving his property from foreclosure. We ran into each other at a community gallery where my art had been accepted for display. He stared at my name on the label for a long time, then turned and said, "You look different, better." I didn't brush it off. I smiled. "I feel different." He bought the piece I'd painted for myself, the woman standing in the firelight. "You made this?" he asked. "No," I said. "I became this." Lucas didn't push. He didn't pry. He just appeared, slowly, consistently. Coffee after art events. Texts that asked, "How are you really?" And over time, I noticed I didn't flinch when I saw his name. I didn't brace for manipulation. With him, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. He never once asked about my ex. Instead, he asked about my dreams, about the studio I wanted to open, about the life I had put on hold for someone else's spotlight. And the more I talked, the more I realized I hadn't lost my light. I had just forgotten where I buried it. There was a moment, quiet and small, when I realized I hadn't thought about my ex for days. It hit me while I was laughing over wine with Lucas, music playing in the background. I looked around my tiny apartment, cluttered with art and plans, and felt full, not with love, not with victory, with peace. And that's when I knew I didn't need revenge. I didn't need closure. I didn't need him to see me win, because the real win was not needing him to see me at all. The silence from him stretched longer. No apologies, no second thoughts, just the occasional digital breadcrumb, a forwarded utility notice, a generic legal update, a holiday greeting sent with the cold precision of someone trying to feel less guilty. I didn't reply. I didn't even open most of them. The man who once claimed to know me had made his final choice, and what he chose wasn't me. Not really. He chose the comfort of being needed over the discomfort of being challenged. He chose being a savior over being a partner. I'd outgrown both versions of him, and in that freedom, I felt something I hadn't in years: relief. I kept building. I used the savings he forgot to lock down and invested in a small, shared art studio. It was modest, paint-streaked floors, rattling windows, and walls thin enough to hear your neighbor hum, but it pulsed with creativity. Women came in quietly, shy about their brush strokes or ideas. And I watched them open up like I had. They didn't just paint, they remembered. Remembered how it felt to be held back, to silence themselves, and then to speak again, through color, through shape, through movement. We were more than artists. We were rebuilding ourselves out loud. Lucas began visiting the studio once a week. He never hovered. He'd bring coffee, sit in the corner with his tablet, and occasionally glance up with a soft smile. He supported without intruding, encouraged without instructing, and the women noticed. "That man looks at you like your art." One whispered. I smiled, not flattered but grounded, because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of being admired. It wasn't conditional. It wasn't performative. It was simply there, like air. I didn't need him to complete me, but it was nice having someone who never asked me to shrink in exchange for their love. Word eventually spread that my ex's situation wasn't as pristine as he had claimed. The widow's child wasn't biologically his, something he'd chosen to ignore early on. The arrangement he thought would be noble had turned suffocating. Emotional strain, financial pressure, and a growing realization that he had sacrificed a steady woman for the illusion of a new identity. I didn't laugh when I heard it. I didn't celebrate. I felt nothing. And that, more than anything, told me I had healed. If your downfall doesn't move me, I've already won. He showed up at my studio one day. No warning. Just appeared in the doorway, like a ghost wearing regret. I was mid-stroke, painting a figure walking into golden light. I didn't stop. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I rinsed my brush. "We said everything already." He hesitated. "You look good. Happy." I met his eyes. "That's because I stopped waiting for you to make me feel that way." And in that moment, he saw it. Not just the strength, but the finality. The version of me he abandoned was gone. The woman before him, she was untouchable. He walked through the studio slowly, eyes scanning the walls, the easels, the joy he no longer had access to. "I didn't think you'd move on this fast," he muttered. I almost laughed. Not out of spite, but out of the absurdity. "I didn't move on fast," I said. "I moved on completely." He left soon after, quieter than he arrived. And I realized then I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was free. That's what real healing does. It doesn't need confrontation. It needs clarity. And my life had never felt clearer. Lucas didn't ask what that visit was about. He didn't need to. He saw it in my eyes. That weightless glow you get when something heavy finally falls off you forever. That night, he brought dinner to the studio and stayed late. We talked until the stars came out, then cleaned brushes in silence. As we packed up, he turned to me and said, "You don't just survive, you rebuild beauty in your wake." I didn't reply. I just kissed him. Once softly, because sometimes no words are needed when someone sees you for everything you are. My divorce was finalized 2 months later. The settlement was clean, and I gave up more than I needed to, but only because I no longer measured my wins in numbers. I didn't want scraps. I wanted silence. Peace. I paid for that peace gladly. And with the stroke of a pen, I erased the last legal tie to a man who once believed I couldn't breathe without his name. I didn't tell anyone it was final. I just walked home, opened a bottle of wine, and painted until the sun came up. One of my paintings was selected for a citywide exhibit. A piece titled Departure, showing a woman mid-step on a train platform, carrying nothing but a key and a flame. The crowd lingered around it longer than most. Some tilted their heads, trying to understand the symbolism. Others just stared, quietly moved. I didn't explain it. I didn't need to. That painting was mine, and hers. The version of me who left first, who didn't beg, who didn't wait to be discarded, who chose herself. And once you choose yourself, the world has no choice but to follow. The gallery opening brought in people I never imagined would say my name. Critics, buyers, silent admirers. And in the back, standing near the refreshments table, was Lucas, dressed in black, calm as ever. He didn't hover or boast. He let others come to me. Let me have my space, my spotlight. When someone asked, "Is that your husband?" he only smiled and replied, "No, she doesn't belong to anyone but herself." And that answer, it lit something in me brighter than any compliment ever could. It said everything I'd spent years aching to hear, that I was enough without being claimed. Madison showed up at the opening, not by invitation. I heard her voice before I saw her. "Is this the same girl who used to cry at lunch?" she said to someone, half mocking, half impressed. I turned, met her eyes. "No," I said. "She's long gone." There was a flicker of confusion, even fear. She'd come to gloat. Maybe she thought I'd be crawling back to relevance through paint and pity, but instead she saw a woman who no longer gave her power. My art didn't need validation, and neither did I. Her presence didn't shake me. It only reminded me how far I'd risen above the noise. The curator pulled me aside near the end of the night. "Your work," she said, feels like closure and resurrection at once. I smiled. It is. Because every brushstroke was a quiet rebellion against the woman I used to be. Every canvas, a grave and a resurrection site. I hadn't just painted my healing. I'd framed it, hung it on walls, sold it to strangers who saw their own stories inside mine. I was no longer asking to be heard. I was the voice now, and it didn't tremble anymore. Lucas offered to drive me home after the show, but I said no. I wanted to walk. He didn't take it personally. He knew some moments were meant to be held alone. I walked the long route, past old corners, familiar cafes, places that used to ache. But now, they didn't hurt. They didn't even sting. They were just places, nothing more. The memories were there, yes, but they no longer controlled me. That's how you know you've healed. When the ghosts show up, and you don't need to chase them away. You just nod and keep walking. I passed the restaurant where my ex once took the widow for dinner. Before the truth came out, I paused briefly outside. They were there again. I recognized his jacket, his tired eyes. He looked up, saw me, and visibly stiffened. I didn't stop walking. I didn't smirk. I didn't try to make a scene. Because the real revenge is no longer needing one. The woman who once begged to be chosen no longer needed to be seen. I had already left the room long before they even realized they were in one. A week later, Lucas asked if I wanted to travel. Anywhere, he said. Anywhere you want to go that you didn't feel allowed to before. I chose Kyoto, not because it was romantic, but because it was quiet, thoughtful, balanced. We walked through temples and markets, through gardens and alleys where no one knew my name. And I realized I didn't miss recognition. I didn't crave being known, because I finally knew myself. And that was enough. In fact, it was everything. On our last night, Lucas gave me a small box. Inside was a silver ring, not an engagement ring, just a band with the words "You first" etched inside. Whatever happens, he said, promise me you'll always choose you first. I didn't cry. I just slipped it on and said, that's how I got here. And he nodded, understanding everything I didn't say. We weren't perfect, but we were present. We weren't forever yet, but we were real. And I had finally learned that real doesn't demand you sacrifice yourself to keep it. Back home, I started hosting a monthly circle at the studio. No painting, just talking. Women came with stories. Some were fresh in their pain. Others were months into healing. And we didn't offer advice. We just told the truth. And truth, shared in a room full of women who had been dismissed, discounted, and left behind, became sacred. We didn't need a savior. We needed space. And I had finally made one, not just for me, but for anyone still learning how to begin again. My mother visited one Sunday, unexpected. She wandered through the studio, touching dried paint with gentle fingers. You're different, she said. I poured her tea. I finally started living my own story. She looked around and nodded quiet. She'd once told me to be patient when my husband pulled away. That men needed time to grieve before they came back. I believed her. But now, I rewrote every page. I'm proud of you, she said softly. And for the first time, I didn't flinch at the words. I let them land. I deserve them, because I didn't just rise from betrayal. I turned it into a life they could never even dream of. I no longer cared who talked about me, whether they whispered, guessed, misremembered, or twisted the story didn't matter. Let them think I left in bitterness. Let them think I lost. I wasn't in the business of correcting people anymore. That's the power of peace. It makes noise irrelevant. People stopped asking about the divorce. Instead, they asked about my studio, my art, my retreats. Because when you stop feeding people your pain, they either disappear or learn to respect your strength. I didn't need to be defended. I was done being explained. I existed loudly and completely without their permission. Lucas and I grew slowly, without pressure, without titles. There was no urgency, just presence. He helped renovate the studio's second floor, where I started a mentorship program for young women artists. He never called it his project, even though he funded half of it. He said, "This isn't about me. It's about you, and every woman like you who was once told to sit down." That was love, not roses, not promises, but brick and mortar hammered together with intention. I didn't just love him. I trusted him. And that, for someone like me, meant everything. The mentorship program grew faster than expected. Every woman who came through those doors left with something more than art. They left with voice, with certainty, with pride. One woman, barely 22, said to me, "I thought I was too broken to start over." I told her, "You're not broken, you're becoming." And she wept, not from weakness, but from recognition. That's what our stories do when we share them honestly. They give other women the map. I didn't want fans. I wanted fires. And I was lighting them one story at a time. My ex sent one last letter. Typed. Formal. Cold. "I hope life has been kind to you." It read. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I had forgotten what his voice sounded like. He was a ghost, a blur in the rear-view mirror of a life that no longer fit me. I didn't burn the letter. I didn't throw it away. I filed it in a drawer labeled Past, because that's all he was now. A plot line I had outgrown. A chapter one had closed before he even realized the ending had been written without him. I stood at the front of a sold-out gallery one evening, watching a room full of people move through my work. My latest series was titled Flight. Every painting showed a woman mid-motion, running, jumping, falling, rising. A man approached me, eyes glassy. "These don't feel fictional," he said. "They feel like memories." I nodded. They are. Because healing isn't a concept. It's a practice. And art was my way of remembering without reliving. These weren't just paintings. They were proof. I survived. I changed. And I never shrank again. Lucas watched me from across the room, drink in hand, pride in his eyes. He didn't try to own the moment. He didn't step into my light. He stood back, quietly holding space. And when our eyes met, I smiled. Not for him, but because I finally knew what it meant to be seen without being edited. He didn't want to shape me. He just wanted to know me. And that was the kind of love I hadn't known I could ask for. The kind that didn't erase what came before, but helped me carry it with less weight. I visited my old neighborhood once more, walked past our former home, the one I used to scrub in silence, waiting for him to come back with gratitude that never arrived. A car I didn't recognize was parked in the driveway, toys scattered across the lawn. The widow's child, perhaps. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even glance twice. That house wasn't mine. That life wasn't mine. And thank God for that. Some places you leave not because they're on fire, but because the air inside was killing you slowly. I had learned to breathe again. That night, I painted something new. A woman walking through a burned forest, tall, barefoot, shoulders square. Around her, ash. Above her, sky. I called it Aftermath. And when it sold, the buyer said, "It feels like survival. I smiled. It's more than that. It's what comes next. Because survival isn't the end of the story. It's the bridge to becoming. And I was living proof that sometimes the worst thing someone does to you is the best thing that ever happened. Not because of the pain, but because of what it forces you to build. I held a private show 6 months later. Only 10 guests. Each woman received a blank canvas at the entrance with one question printed across the bottom. Who do you become when no one is watching? They cried. They painted. They laughed. They remembered. That night wasn't about me. It was about them. The quiet women. The tired ones. The ones still searching. And I told them, you don't need to rise perfectly. You just need to rise visibly. And they did. Every single one of them. Because once a woman learns she can save herself, she stops waiting for anyone else to do it. The more I built, the quieter my past became. The voices that once told me to be patient, to lower my expectations, to be the good wife, faded into static. They'd never known me, only their idea of who I should be. I no longer carried their opinions like commandments. I had rewritten my own laws. My body, my space, my boundaries, all sacred now. Not up for compromise. Not up for negotiation. When people asked, how did you forgive? I told them the truth. I didn't. I just stopped carrying what wasn't mine to hold anymore. One of my paintings made it into a national collection. The press reached out, calling me an unexpected breakout. I laughed when I read that. Unexpected to them. Maybe not to me. I had known, deep down, what I was capable of, long before anyone clapped. That's the trick no one talks about. You don't wait to be discovered. You discover yourself first. Then, when the world finally catches up, you're already too far ahead to need their applause. Lucas and I bought land by the ocean, not for luxury, but for stillness, a place where we could build a small studio, a garden, and a quiet life where success didn't mean busyness. He planted herbs while I painted. We took morning walks without our phones. Sometimes I'd just watch the tide and remind myself, this is what it looks like to be chosen by me, not forced, not begged, not bargained for, but earned. Every moment of it. He never competed with my silence. He held it. And that kind of love doesn't shout. It stays. Madison sent a message. Years later. Just 4 words. I see it now. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to be seen by her anymore. I wasn't the girl she dismissed. I wasn't the backup singer in someone else's song. I had written my own music now, and it played in every gallery, every home, every heart that found strength in the stories I once bled to survive. Her validation was unnecessary. Her regret, irrelevant. I hosted a retreat near the ocean for women who had left first. That's what I called them. The ones who didn't wait to be thrown out, who gathered their strength in silence and walked before the door could shut in their face. We sat in circles, sipped tea, shared laughter and rage. And at the end, I gave them each a mirror with one word etched into the glass. Returned. Because that's what we did. We didn't just leave. We returned to ourselves. Stronger, smarter, sharper, unapologetic. A journalist once asked me, if you could go back and stop that betrayal from happening, would you? I thought about it, truly, deeply. Then I said, no, because without it, I would have stayed small. I would have kept trying to earn love by shrinking. He didn't just betray me, he released me. The journalist paused, stunned, but I meant it. Pain doesn't always ruin you. Sometimes it redirects you to the version of yourself that was buried under years of being quiet, obedient, convenient. And once you meet her, you never unsee her again. Lucas proposed on a rainy morning, no speech, no ring box, just coffee, a messy bed, and two simple words, "Ready?" And I laughed, not because I was surprised, but because we didn't marry to fix each other. We were already whole. We married because we liked our lives better when they were shared. And when I said yes, it wasn't from desperation. It was from power, from peace, from knowing exactly who I was, what I deserved, and what I'd never again accept from anyone. The wedding was private, barefoot on our beach, just a few friends and waves in the background. No father walking me down the aisle, no bouquet toss, just me in a soft white slip dress, walking toward the man who didn't save me, but stood beside me after I saved myself. And when we said our vows, I didn't promise forever. I promised truth, and he promised freedom. That's all we needed. That's all we ever wanted. And it was more than enough. My name started appearing in places I never imagined, lists of influential women, panels of creative entrepreneurs, awards named after women who survived impossible things. I showed up not as someone who overcame, but as someone who rewrote. I didn't just recover, I remade. And every time someone asked, "How did you do it?" I gave them the same answer. I left before they took everything. Because sometimes walking away is the most sacred form of survival. Sometimes that's how you win, by knowing exactly when not to stay. And when I tucked myself into bed each night, in the quiet house I built, beside the man who never asked me to shrink, I didn't whisper prayers of regret. I whispered thanks for the woman I left behind and the one who rose in her place. I stopped defining my life by what I had survived. That part was done. Now, it was about what I was building. I no longer needed to bring up his name. I no longer checked his social media. I no longer cared what anyone thought of my exit. What I cared about was this: waking up peaceful, speaking without hesitation, loving without shrinking, creating without apology. That was the new language I spoke. And the fluency came from the fire I had once walked through barefoot, the same fire that refined me into steel. Lucas and I built a library in our home, floor-to-ceiling books, journals, and one wall dedicated to art from women who had left something behind to find themselves. When friends visited, they always paused longest in that room. "It feels holy," one said, and it did, because it was. Every item on those shelves had been touched by grief, rebirth, clarity, and courage. That room wasn't decor. It was a declaration. We don't just move on, we transform. I never saw my ex again. Not in person. Rumors came and went, financial struggles, a messy second breakup, attempts to rekindle the charm that once got him pity. But I didn't follow it. Not out of cruelty, out of choice. The woman I am now would have never married him. And that's the final layer of healing, when you stop mourning the loss and start realizing you dodged a lifetime of being small. He didn't destroy me. He revealed me. And I became indestructible. We published a book. Not just my story, but the stories of 20 other women who had walked away from betrayal, from lies, from lives that didn't fit. We called it She Left First. The book sold quietly but steadily. It wasn't a bestseller, but it reached the women who needed it. And one letter sent anonymously read, "Your story saved my life." I left the next morning. I held that letter like a heartbeat, because that's what this was all for. Not applause, not revenge. just freedom passed forward. At one gallery show, a young girl, barely 18, came up to me, eyes glassy. I thought I had to wait until someone chose me. She said, "But then I found your work." I took her hands, looked her in the eye, and said, "Don't wait. Not for love, not for worth, not for life to begin. You are the start." And in that moment, I wasn't just the artist. I was the echo, the permission, the proof that you don't have to be chosen to be complete. Lucas and I celebrated 5 years, one rainy Sunday, dancing barefoot in the kitchen. No gifts, no party, just laughter, leftovers, and music playing too loud. And as he spun me once, then again, I thought, this is the life I never knew I was allowed to want. Simple, whole, safe. There's no climax, no applause. Just a woman who stopped chasing closure and chose joy instead. A woman who gave herself the love she used to beg for. The studio continued to grow. Women brought their daughters. Friends brought their sisters. One even brought her ex-husband, who stood silent the entire session, eyes wide. I never asked. I never judged, because sometimes healing has to be witnessed. And that space, the one I built with paint, patience, and power, was proof that second chances don't come from others. There's something you take with both hands, even if they're shaking. I opened my first international gallery at 40. They asked for a quote to print in the brochure. I gave them this. She left with nothing but her name, and that was more than enough. Because it was. That's all I had when I walked away. No money, no home, no applause, just the quiet certainty that staying would cost me more than leaving. And in that silence, I found the spark, the script, the strength, and I never lost it again. My story wasn't the loudest. It wasn't filled with scandal or rage, but it was unshakable. And in a world that demands noise to believe a woman's worth, I became the proof that you could whisper your way into power and have it echo for generations. They thought I'd beg. They thought I'd crumble. They thought I'd wait. But I left first, and in leaving, I became the one thing they never planned for: free. And now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see the wife who was left. I see the woman who rose, and I'd choose her every time.